Hello, I'm Biko Skalla, and this is number 0764, the Stuff File Program, with Peter Anthony Holder, and it comes to you right now.
The following program is brought to you in living color.
Now, it's time for an eclectic mix of interviews and some of the oddest news stories you'll ever hear. It's the Stuff File Program with Peter Anthony Holder.
Hey there, hi there, ho there! Peter Anthony Holder here with you, and yes, this is indeed another edition of the Stuff File Program, number 0764. And coming up on this edition of the Stuff File Program, you'll meet Steve Fredlund, who is the author of Do the Unright Thing, Memoir of a People Pleaser.
This was the book that I ended up writing that wasn't the book I was going to write. I was going to write this great book about being an expert on how we become happier and all of those things. But as I started writing, I realized the real key to my happiness was overcoming my addiction to being a people pleaser. And I realized that what really led me back to happiness was when I realized I didn't have to try to strive so hard to do everything right by everybody else's standards. And so that's where the name of the book came from, was how I found my path back to happiness by breaking free from being a people pleaser by doing the unright thing.
Christine Milks is a gardening expert who writes the column The Constant Gardener in Vista Magazine. She has tips for the first-time gardener.
Gardening is a lot easier than a lot of people want to pretend it is. A lot of horticulturalists try to make gardening harder than it is. That can be off-putting to people. First-time gardeners being scared to go shopping in a garden center because they don't understand the names of plants. They don't understand, like, the Latin names. Horticultural Latin is not real Latin. It's all fake. And first-time gardeners especially need to know that it's fake. The horticultural industry is slanted against beginners.
Marc Hartzman, the curator of WeirdHistorian.com, is back with a story for the month of April. This one deals with Galileo's fingers.
There was a very odd headline on April 5th, 1906, which said, Galileo's finger for sale. And so the article said, what is the finger of a dead scientist worth? This question has been stirring all Florence, the thumb and index finger, the right hand of Galileo, having recently been offered for sale in that city by an old woman named Laura Joni. So it kind of went on a little bit about this particular sale. It talked about the government had caught wind of the sale happening and tried to investigate it. And they did prove that the fingers were in fact genuine. So they were authenticated as Galileo's fingers.
And there's lots and lots of Stuff File news and, of course, an idiot of the day. The guest slater, the person who told you this was show number 0764, was Biko Skalla, who is the broadcast entertainer for the baseball team, the Savannah Bananas. We had him on the show back on show number 0755, and you can always go back and listen to that show to hear what Biko had to say. Thank you very much, Biko, for doing the guest slate on this edition of the Stuff File Program, a show that is listener-supported, fan-funded radio that depends on you for our success. Join us at patreon.com to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. Well, let's get right to the stuff. Some people go to extremes to get a great deal, but on March 31st, one disgruntled customer at a Burger King drive-thru in Willowick, Ohio, pulled a firearm on an employee who was trying to give him a discount on his breakfast items.
It's morning, I'm hungry, gonna go to Burger King.
The employee, 38-year-old Howard Vernon, said that when he gave the customer his total, the man argued that it should cost more. Vernon went on to say, I'm trying to explain to him that we had a promotion going on, and he began cussing and getting all loud.
Burger King for breakfast? Yes, there's such a thing.
The enraged man drove his gray Honda sedan out of the drive-thru, but quickly returned, then stepped out of his car and pointed a gun at Vernon. After threatening him and calling him racial slurs, the man returned to his car and sped away.
It's breakfast, new breakfast, it's better by a ton. Platters so darn big, they can block out the sun,
said Vernon. It was about some bread and sausage sandwiches at 9 o'clock in the morning on Easter. And you're that mad that you'd pull a gun and put it in somebody's face?
Yummy, 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 tummy, 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 yummy, tummy, yummy, yummy, tummy.
Authorities are still searching for the customer. See, not everybody is as happy as the folks in those Burger King breakfast commercials. Some people are downright surly, even when you're trying to literally act out your company slogan of a customer having it your way, and at a discount, too.
Have breakfast your way.
There's just no pleasing some people. Young people are cutting loose and losing their blues in Cambodia, but rather than embracing the footloose of it all, Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Manet is cracking down on the source: vehicle owners and operators who replace their cars' standard horns with ones that blast popular tunes. So enticing are these familiar refrains that young Cambodians are literally dancing in the streets, which the Prime Minister says poses a traffic hazard. He has directed the Ministry of Public Works and Transportation, along with Cambodia's police force, to crack down on vehicle operators whose horns emit anything other than the standard honk. Okay, so while I understand the plight of the Prime Minister, some might say that this could be considered overkill. I concur, but then again, I am reminded of one particular car horn, and with it, I suddenly become the old man in the neighborhood who shoos the kids off his lawn. That's because I truly believe that anybody who has this particular horn should be rounded up and charged under the Geneva Convention at The Hague for crimes against humanity. The horn I'm talking about? The one that plays La Cucaracha. Yeah, play that again and I'll hunt you down. Oh, it's on. And finally, in this section of Stuff File News, before we get to our first guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder, students and parents at Alston Ridge Elementary in Cary, North Carolina, have been dealing with a unique carpool annoyance, an aggressive pest of a turkey. The bird pecks at cars, windows, people, any perceived threat to his territory, said Cary Animal Service Officer Beth Wilson. This was a young male turkey who probably was looking for a mate and was unable to find one. Really? I didn't know that a turkey could also be an incel. Anyway, Wilson goes on to say he was trying to claim a territory, and I guess he decided the carpool lane was going to be it. Wilson predicts Lonely Tom will chill out just as soon as his hormones die down. Yes, we've all waited for that moment, either when dealing with teenagers or in our own teenage years. And let's get to our first guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program, shall we? Steve Fredlund is the author of Do the Unright Thing, Memoir of a People Pleaser. Looking at his bio, Steve is listed as a recovering actuary turned professional speaker who is known as the Safari Dude. He also is the founder of the Safari Way. So there's a lot to unpack here. Steve joins us via Zoom from Iowa. Hi, Steve.
Hey, Peter, how we doing?
Just tickety-boo. Thanks very much for being on the program with us. Just right off the bat, the title of your book, Do the Unright Thing, you would not get along with my late mother. I'm just saying that right off the bat right now.
Well, let's unpack that a little bit. What's going on there?
Yeah. So what is it to do the unright thing? And I guess the answer is in the second half of the title, which is Memoir of a People Pleaser.
Yeah, it really is. This was the book that I ended up writing that wasn't the book I was going to write. I was going to write this great book about, being an expert on how we become happier and all of those things. But as I started writing, I realized the real key to my happiness was overcoming my addiction to being a people pleaser. That addiction that so many of us have to that external validation that we need to make us feel like we're okay. And I realized that what really led me back to happiness was when I realized I didn't have to try to strive so hard to do everything right by everybody else's standards. And so that's where the name of the book came from, was how I found my path back to happiness, really, by breaking free from being a people pleaser by doing the unright thing. So it's intentionally not do the wrong thing. So maybe your mother would be okay. But it's somewhere in between doing the right thing and doing the wrong thing is this unright space.
Okay, so at one point, you'd have to acknowledge the fact that you are or were a people pleaser. So Once you unpack that, did you delve into the origin as to why you were a people pleaser?
Yeah, I did. And that's actually where the book was going for a long time. It was going to be this real in-depth look at, why we're people pleasers, why some people are more susceptible to that. But for me, I think there's certain personalities that are predisposed to being a people pleaser. I think many of us want to please other people, but based on our circumstance, based on our life history, based on a whole series of events, some of us, myself included, start finding our identity in actually pleasing other people. So, for example, when you're a young person and an adult were to ask you to do something and you do that, and they say, "Hey, thank you," and they start giving you, props for doing that. For me, I internalize that as, oh, well, if they're thanking me for doing that, they must think I'm okay. They must like me. And so I started finding my identity, my okayness, my acceptance of myself in that acknowledgement, that affirmation that I got from other people. And so I was predisposed to it because of my history. But then, I started finding my identity more and more and more of that. And it just kind of spiraled into my whole adulthood, where my whole life was all about making other people happy.
Now, I also said you are a recovering actuary who has turned a professional speaker. And I'm just wondering, is actuary an actual job that people pleasers usually gravitate toward? Because I don't see it as being one. Or am I wrong?
I think what you find is that people pleasers are all over among us, right? We're hidden everywhere, and a lot of times we hide that. A lot of us that have these really good lives that look really good on paper, like being an actuary, like being any professional job, a lot of times there's these people pleasers hidden underneath the surface, but you never know it because they're so good at hiding it. And, when I started coming out as a people pleaser, it's amazing how many people I've encountered that are in that same situation. And some of them are still living in that situation, unwilling to do kind of what they really want to do. And I think actuaries in some regard, just like a lot of analytical functions, a lot of us became actuaries because we were good at math. And so for me, hey, you're good at math, you should study math in college. Okay, well, if that's what everybody thinks I should do, if that's what I'm supposed to do, if that's what I'm expected to do, if that's what will please people, I'll study math. And then you go study math, and somebody at the college, your advisor, says, "Oh, you're really good at math, you should become an actuary." Okay, if that's what I should do, then I'm going to do that. And you kind of continue on in your life journey doing what you should do, doing what the right thing is to do. And eventually it just sort of accumulates into this realization that this is a good life. I'm an actuary. I've built this good life, but is it even really my own life?
So when did you have your aha moment? When did you decide to start turning things around and becoming the person who you are and becoming the person who wrote the book, Do the Unright Thing, and the person who became a professional speaker?
Yeah, unfortunately for me, it took a big time anxiety attack, something that I'd never struggled with before. I'd always thought, what is this whole anxiety thing? Is it real or not? I'm just being completely honest. I just didn't understand it. And over the series of about 10 years, I just started becoming more and more and more unhappy, and I couldn't understand why. And so I was trying everything I could in my power to become happier. And that's part of the right things. I was searching for the right thing to do. If I just go back and get my MBA, if I just quit that job, if I just work for the nonprofit, if I just start a podcast, if I just start a poker training site. And so for 10 years, I was searching for that right thing to do to become happier. And all that happened is I became busier and busier. My resume looked good, but I was just busier. And after about 10 years of that, I just had this deep breakdown, this anxiety attack. I was outside of my office building in Minnesota, and I just couldn't go in. I was crying. I was sweating. I had no idea what was going on. I wrote a note to my family in case I died, and I'm just like, what is happening? And so that's actually what became the turning point for me to lead me to actually go see a therapist and start to understand what's actually going on here. And so it still took a couple of years after that, but that was really the turning point when I started giving myself permission to say, what kind of life do I actually want to have? Not what I should want, not what people expect of me, not what the default is, not what I inherited, but what kind of life experience do I actually want to have? And it was that question from the therapist that really changed everything for me and started me on this new trajectory, really, of being able to have the freedom to consider what kind of life I actually want to have.
So when you wrote the book and when you go out public speaking, do you get a sense when you're talking to a large group of people, do you see the light bulbs go on or the fog being lifted from some of the folks? Like you're saying something that they maybe didn't realize was part of their problem and they had their actual aha moment right in front of you?
Yeah, and that's why I do it, and that's what I love. I haven't given a speech or a talk in a year where there haven't been people afterwards just crying. Now, for a lot of people, it doesn't really resonate. They think it's good, they're entertained, they're whatever. But for a good chunk of the people, they feel like I've been reading their mail. I mean, they come up to me and they say, "This is exactly what it is. You put words to what I've been feeling," or "This is something my brother needs to talk to you about." And so it's different things for different people. But for a lot of folks, this idea of you can have a really good life on paper and you can have everybody fooled and you can even feel like you've accomplished a lot of things. But that deep-seated feeling of being unsettled, being discontent, being unfulfilled, not really being happy is a pandemic, frankly, among so many people right now, especially those in the professional setting.
Now, I also mentioned in the introduction that you are known as the Safari Dude and that you are the founder of the Safari Way. So what exactly is that and why are you called the Safari Dude?
Yeah, that started a couple of years ago when I really started finding my voice and speaking. The reason those things tie together is, first of all, I've been on a number of African safaris. So it started when I did humanitarian work in Rwanda. I went on safari at the end of those things, and I got hooked. So I've been on a number of safaris. And so I've learned a lot about myself. I've learned a lot about humanity. And frankly, I've just acquired a whole bunch of these really cool stories. And so that's my brand, and that's the context within which I share my insights about how we can become happier. And so the Safari Way is really taking what we know about African safaris and how to make African safaris truly epic and applying that to our lives. Bridging this gap to understand that life itself, it's Helen Keller actually said this, life itself is either an epic adventure or it's nothing at all. And what I learned is that the same things that you apply to an African safari to make those adventures truly epic are the same things that when we start to apply them to our lives, we start becoming happier. We start being more fulfilled. We start feeling more empowered. And so the Safari Way is really all about inviting people to start viewing life like an epic adventure. Start waking up in the morning and viewing life like it is a safari that is filled with ups and downs and highs and lows and knowns and unknowns, and then start to apply some of these principles that we really all know, but it's a new way of thinking about them, a new perspective. Start applying those to our lives and to see what happens.
Your book, Do the Unright Thing, I'm looking at the cover of it. There is a child on the cover. Is that you by any chance?
That is me. That is 7-year-old Stevie Rice. Before I was adopted and changed my name, I was scared to death. You can see my mom's bowl cut that I had there, and that was my school photo right before I turned 8 years old, and I was scared to death. So that is me. Yeah.
Because I was about to say that is not the face of a happy child.
No, it's not. That's why I chose that one, because that was how I felt. I mean, I'm smiling. You can see I'm trying to smile, but my chin is curled in and I'm just scared. Inwardly, I was so scared, but I was doing the right thing, right? Because you're supposed to smile for the school photos, and, mom would be disappointed if I didn't smile. And so that is me kind of holding back the real self, but putting on this fake semi-smile.
It's a fascinating topic and a fascinating idea for a book. And kudos to you for having realized where your life was going and how you wanted to change. And more importantly, kudos to you for trying to help people do the same.
Well, thank you for saying that. I mean, it really has been life-giving, not only to express myself. I think I'm a real creative at heart. That's what I've always enjoyed as a child. I always enjoyed singing, writing parodies, lip-syncing, pranking people, laughing. That was really who I was. And then I became an actuary, and it's great people, a great career, but it kind of dampened my whole creative spirit. And now I feel like I'm kind of re-emerging out. And I feel, frankly, very fortunate that I was one of those folks that was pretty miserable, but I found this path back to happiness. And now it is so life-giving to actually go and share this with people. And still, I think, in many ways, I'm preaching to the choir. I'm still learning how to walk this journey. I'm still reminding myself every day that life is an adventure. And so it is helping other people, and I appreciate you saying that, but it's also reminding me on a daily basis that life is this great adventure and to really just soak it up for all it's worth.
Well, Steve, thank you very much for taking the time to be on the program with us.
My pleasure, Peter. It's so great to talk to you.
Steve Fredlund, author of Do the Unright Thing, Memoir of a People Pleaser. You can go to my website at thestufffile.com, check out the show number for this program, which is show number 0764, and you'll find the link to Steve's site, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order his book directly. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder.
There's still more guests, more news, and an idiot of the day coming your way on the Stuff File program. Stay tuned. The Stuff File program is a listener-supported, fan-funded radio show that depends on you for our success. Join us at patreon.com to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. Sign up and find out about our rewards program. Being a patron doesn't have to be a long-term commitment. There's absolutely no obligation. You could join today and end whenever you'd like, but the time we have your support would be so greatly appreciated. We'd also love to hear your thoughts about the show and even your ideas for rewards. Join us for the ride. Join us at patreon.com/thestufffileprogram program.
Yo, Mishak here. You're listening to my uncle, Peter Anthony Holder. It's fascinating radio for everybody from 8 to 80. Even if you're really old, like my grandmother, Peter's sister, who I understand is older than bacteria. Take it away, Peter.
And still to come on the program, we'll talk about gardening for newbies. Plus, we have Marc Hartzman from WeirdHistorian.com talking about Galileo's fingers. Yes. We also have an idiot of the day coming your way a little later on, and much more in Stuff File News right here, right now. And you know, fugitives have feelings too. After the Avon and Somerset police posted a wanted notice on Facebook on April the 1st, describing Daniel Calloway, a wanted fugitive, as white, about 5'9" of average build, with brown eyes, receding hairline, Calloway, or someone claiming to be him, replied, "No need to mention the hairline, guys." A comment posted by the same account the next day reminded the police that Calloway's birthday had passed since the information was compiled for the notice and that he was now 29. Calloway is being sought in connection with driving offenses, criminal damage, and threatening behavior, so while social media users got a kick out of Calloway's comical posts, authorities have warned the public not to approach him and to call authorities if he is spotted. Calloway seems to want to split hairs about his receding hairline, but I'm sure the cops are combing the area in search of him. Yeah, and speaking of hair, okay, so here is a bit of a history lesson about the origin of the colors of the barber pole as a trade sign. It may have its genesis in Renaissance-era Amsterdam. Barber surgeons used a red stripe on their tunic to indicate that they were prepared to bleed their patients, a white stripe to indicate that they set bones or pull teeth, or a blue stripe to indicate they would perform a shave if nothing more urgent was needed. Confusing modern times for medieval times may be what's happening in this particular story. A man showed up on Friday afternoon at a barber shop in St. Petersburg, Florida, with a gunshot wound. The man drove himself to the barber shop in St. Pete to ask for help after being shot at another location. He was taken to the hospital and is expected to be okay. Officers are working to learn where the shooting happened. No one has been taken into custody. No other details are immediately available. Again, I'm sure the police are combing for clues. Thinking she had spotted an abandoned baby hedgehog on the side of the road, an animal lover in England carefully gathered the creature into a box lined with newspaper and took it home, setting out some cat food and leaving it undisturbed overnight. After realizing it hadn't moved or eaten, she took the box to Lower Moss Wood Nature Reserve and Wildlife Hospital in Cheshire, the next morning, where hospital manager Janet Coetzee realized it wasn't a hedgehog. The fluffy, spiky, hedgehog-colored creature was actually the pom-pom from a winter beanie. Because the elderly rescuer had kept her distance through the night, she hadn't noticed the ball's lack of eyes or ears. But her compassion melted the staff members' hearts. Coetzee said the woman did absolutely the right thing, aside from the fact that it wasn't a hedgehog. Well, in all my years of doing the Stuff File News, and it has been extensive, I think this is the first story I've ever come across where someone was trying to serve cat food to a pom-pom. And by the way, I'm sure that woman's cat was pissed. And finally, in this section of Stuff File News, before we get to our next guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder, the clerk at an unnamed store in Kent, Washington, had several customers in line at about 8 a.m., but noticed when a man bypassed checkout carrying a bottle of booze and was headed for the door. The clerk called after the man to say he had to pay for the bottle, but the man ignored that and kept walking. He was in enough of a hurry that he didn't notice who was standing in line, a couple of uniformed cops who went after him. When they caught up with the man and he realized who had grabbed him, the man asked for a break. But the officers not only had the man red-handed in the theft, including a couple of burritos that he had slipped into his pockets, but a computer check found that there was a warrant out for his arrest in another matter. He was booked into jail. Hey, pal, when you're already wanted by the cops and you feel the need to shoplift, check to see if there are any uniformed police officers lingering in said establishment right at the door at the cash.
Oh, sometimes I forget that you're the stupid one.
Anyway, let's get to our next guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program, shall we? Spring has sprung, the grass is riz, I wonder where the flowers is. Actually, some places still have snow, but it is spring, and for a lot of people, this is the beginning of the gardening season. Whether you have a large landscaped area or just an urban window box or indoor plants. Christine Milks is a lifelong gardener who also has a regular column called The Constant Gardener in Vista Magazine, which is a publication for a seniors association in the Kingston, Ontario region. Chris joins us via Zoom from Gananoque, Ontario. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Peter. How are you?
Just tickety-boo. Thanks very much for being on the program with us.
Love it.
And full disclosure, we go way back from the days when I was working in Brockville, Ontario, and you were running a flower shop called Flowers and Such by Mills, also in Brockville. That's where we met so many years ago. So thank you for doing this.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So what's the first thing, especially for somebody, and you know me, you know I do not have a green thumb. And I also have some fears of plants, but we won't go there. But that being said, for someone who is thinking, I want to start a garden, or I want to start some plants, or I've purchased a house and I want to build a garden, what's the first thing somebody should do at this time of year to get that situation ready?
If I may quote Douglas Adams, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, don't panic. Gardening is a lot easier than a lot of people want to pretend it is. And it's an interesting question because I have often felt that a lot of horticulturalists try to make gardening harder than it is. And that can be off-putting to people. So this is like a multifaceted question that you've asked me. My mind's going a million miles a minute. It's right down to people being, first-time gardeners being scared to go shopping in a garden center because they don't understand the names of plants. They don't understand like the Latin names. One of my most popular columns in Vista that I've been asked to reprint a couple of times, and I went out and talked to a couple of gardening clubs over the years, and they would ask me, can I bring copies of a column? And it was about horticultural Latin. Horticultural Latin is not real Latin. It's all fake. And first-time gardeners especially need to know that it's fake. So I basically I came up with a list of a lot of Latin names that you would see on a plant label or a tree or shrub label and what it meant. And basically it came with a caveat, like, don't be afraid to go in and this is how you decipher a label. And that's what I realized that, the horticultural industry is slanted against beginners.
Okay, well, having said that, let's step back a little bit. You want to start a garden, but you go into a garden center and you say it's stacked up against starters. How do you even know what you want? Like, what's a good beginner's garden, so to speak?
You need to know your yard. You need to know how much sunlight you're going to get, and that's probably the biggest factor. And I don't care whether you're growing ornamentals or whether you're trying to grow some perennials or trees, or whether you're trying to grow vegetables. So in our part of the world, that means you're probably going to have two different shade levels. In the spring, when your deciduous trees have no leaves, is completely different from high summer when the deciduous trees are fully leafed. So as I say, that's got to be the biggest factor in having a successful garden of whatever kind. The next thing is what kind of soil you're working with. Do you have soil that it's like clay and it has poor drainage? Is it sandy soil that the water runs right through it? What do you have to do to augment the existing soil? And what would be the other thing I would think of? You mentioned about buying a house. It takes you literally, in most parts of Canada, 4 seasons, a full year, before you know what you already exists in your yard. It's, I guess, patience is a gardener's virtue, and patience is a true virtue for the first-time homeowner of an existing property in that aspect. And the current column for Vista is going to talk about peat moss and what peat moss can do for soil, whether it's clay soil from the Canadian Shield or sandy soil. So anyway, that's where I would start. Figure out your sunlight availability and the amount of moisture that's available in your soil.
Okay, so once you figure that out, and again, I'm talking a newbie here. So once you figure that out, what does that mean in terms of what you might get? I'm assuming that, as there are so many different people, there are so many different tastes in the types of things that you might like to see in your garden, but that doesn't necessarily mean that what you want in your garden is going to be successful depending upon whatever climate and shade you have.
Right. And so going back to like walking into a garden center for a first time, again, doesn't matter whether you're shopping for ornamentals, flowering plants, annuals, perennials, or vegetable plants. I've often told people, look at the signage or the plant labels. The information on a label is not a guideline. It's the truth. So if something has a big yellow sun on it and says it's going to grow in full sun, that plant is not going to be successful in shade, no matter how much you want to plant it in the shade in your yard, and vice versa. Anything with like a blue label in a garden center is typically rule of thumb, and I'm all about easy gardening and rules of thumb. Blue signs, blue labels in a plant are always indicating that that plant can only thrive in shade or part shade. That plant, there again, as much as you like, I'm trying to think of a plant, blue sapphire lobelia. As much as you love dark blue lobelia, you can't plant that in full sun, and the label tells you that. So you have to just look at the label, and it's more about color. Thankfully, a lot of the plant growers just assume that the buying public is basically illiterate. So things are based on color in a label or signage. Does that help?
Yes, it does. And for a newbie, again, should someone try to get a variety of plants within a garden for the first time, or stick to one or two just to be safe? Because I'm assuming also that some things don't necessarily go with other things, especially if they're planted close together.
Right. I think I also need to quote one of my favorite employees in our garden center from years past. She was a retired teacher. She was a wonderful gardener, her personal gardener. And she would often advise customers, she said, well, gardening's nothing but a grand experiment anyway. And she was quite true. if you're not prepared to accept, and I'm hard pressed to call it a failure, if you're not willing to accept
disappointment,
then you're probably going to have a hard time gardening. But if you're okay with that, if you're okay with stuff going wrong every now and then, go ahead. Try and plant stuff together if you want. You'll know in a year whether it works or not. And you can always, that's why gardening diaries are tremendous, because they'll tell you what you can grow together and what you can't.
Okay,
But Peter, and then a lot of information too, getting back to those labels, that's going to tell you the maximum height or the maximum spread of a plant. And so that can help you when you're trying to decide where to plant things. So you need to plant something tall at the back of your plot and something shorter along the front, or it's going to be dwarfed.
Okay, so we're just about out of time. So I'm going to ask a quick question here, and that is, sure. And we haven't mentioned anybody who is in an urban dwelling where you only have a balcony or flower box.
Right.
So if somebody walked into a garden center and you were owning that garden center and somebody said, I've never done a garden before, but I've got this space. It's not a big space. What should I buy as far as putting something in the ground for the first time?
First off, you can grow anything you want in a window box or a planter on your balcony. It doesn't just have to be, something that's a pleasing compilation of flowering plants. Grow some herbs in there. They're just as dramatic and look great with, petunias or a canna lily, and yet you'll be able to harvest something off your balcony if you want. And a lot of herbs, for instance, if you let them go to flower, there's some very attractive flowers in them. So I would always advise people to, you know what, if you only have a limited space to garden, combine something edible with something flowering, and you get the best of both worlds, typically. If you have a small garden plot in a yard, if it's like a townhouse or something, there again, it's the same thing. And always remember to plant the tallest stuff at the back and the shortest stuff at the front. A guideline for making a planter has to be advice I read years ago from a company called Proven Winners that does a lot of patented plants. You walk into a garden center and you want to buy plants to fill a pot, fill a small garden. Always think thriller, spiller, filler. The thriller is the expensive, gorgeous plant that's going to be very showy in the middle of a planting. A spiller is anything that's going to trail over like a vine, some sort of an ivy. And a filler, those are those inexpensive box plants, for instance, that give you lots of color. And you plant those in and around your expensive plant, the thriller.
Interesting. So what was that? That was thriller, spiller and filler. Okay.
Yep.
Got that.
And that makes shopping in a garden center exceptionally easy.
I like that. Okay, so spiller, filler, thriller, spiller, filler.
Yep.
Excellent.
That gives you something that's going to grow tall, something that's going to fill in around the pot, and something that's going to spill over the edge of the pot.
That's great advice. One of the reasons why you are a columnist writing a garden column. And that garden column is in Vista, which is a Seniors Association Kingston Region publication. And Christine, I thank you very, very much for taking the time to be on the program with us. We should have you on more often.
Oh, my pleasure, Peter. Thank you so much for asking.
Christine Milks, who has a regular column called The Constant Gardener in Vista Magazine, a publication for a Seniors Association in the Kingston, Ontario region. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder.
Got something for the mailbag? Drop Peter a line. He'd love to hear from you. Send your email to mailbag@thestufffile.com. And remember, stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H. That's mailbag@thestufffile.com. Or catch up with him on Twitter or Facebook. There's more Stuff File coming your way in just a few moments.
Hey, how would you like to become a patron of the Stuff File program? It's easy to do. By going to patreon.com and becoming a patron, you help to make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. And if you become a regular patron, as a Patreon reward, I'll share with you an electronic version of my book, Great Conversations, my interviews with two men on the moon and a galaxy of stars. You've heard me say on many occasions about the myriad of celebrities I've had the chance to talk to that are contained in my book, which is published by Bear Manor Media. You've also heard me mention that some of the celebrities in my book, and many others, can be heard on our page at patreon.com. If you've been on the fence about joining Patreon, let me try to pull you over to our side. Join Patreon and claim your copy of Great Conversations, my interviews with two men on the moon and a galaxy of stars. Sign up at patreon.com/The Stuff File Program.
This is the Stuff File Program with Peter Anthony Holder. This broadcast is coming to you from upstairs. Get out of the house.
And still to come on the program, we will talk to Marc Hartzman from WeirdHistorian.com about Galileo's fingers. We also have an Idiot of the Day coming your way, but I've got a few more Stuff File news stories to share with you right here, right now. A fight broke out in a classroom at Harrisburg, Pennsylvania High School's John Harris campus. It probably wouldn't have helped to summon the teacher of that class to intervene, or even one of the school's safety monitors. The fight was between the teacher and a safety monitor. Superintendent Eric Turman said it started when the monitor unexpectedly confronted the teacher about a personal concern, which then erupted into a violent physical confrontation in front of the classroom full of students who took photos and videos of the melee, because that's what people do these days. Other staff and even some students jumped in to pull the two adults apart. The unnamed teacher, a 2-year veteran, and the unnamed safety monitor, who had worked at the school for 7 years, were both put on administrative leave. Said Turman, "We apologize for the impact this incident may have had on our students who look at our staff as trusted adults." Yeah, and we know that teens always view adults as trustworthy, don't we? Yes, we were teens once. Yeah, anyway, the Tennessee State Senate has passed SB 2691, which would ban chemtrails from aircraft. Wild-eyed conspiracy theorists claim that the water vapor that trails behind jets are actually chemtrails, geoengineering experiments that are intentionally dispersing chemicals into the atmosphere, including some which may occur within the state of Tennessee, which are used for sterilization, reduction of life expectancy, mind control, and weather control, and will be made illegal if the new law passes. Not only is there no truth to the conspiracy theory, there can't be, says a research group at Harvard University. But, these people are not going to trust Harvard. Anyway, even if there was such a program, they say, they being Harvard, it wouldn't result in white streaks behind planes, but bright yellow and red atmospheric effects that we don't see. The chemtrails theory, Harvard says, is, quote, as convincing as saying that alien beings walk among us in disguise as people because some people act very strangely, unquote. I think with that last statement, Harvard freely admits Tennessee's legislators are aliens. Yeah. Anyway, this is a perfect time for our last guest from WeirdHistorian.com, so let's get to our last guest for this show, shall we? Marc Hartzman, the curator of WeirdHistorian.com, is back with a story for the month of April. This time, the topic is Galileo's fingers. Marc joins us via Skype from New York. So, Marc, what's the detail on the digits?
Well, this is a really, I think, a pretty fun, curious story. So the reason it's for April is there was a very odd headline on April 5th, 1906, which said, Galileo's finger for sale. So, that's like, oh, how much is that going to cost? If I were there, I would have been like, I want to buy Galileo's finger. That sounds like a great piece to have in the collection. And so the article said, a few highlights from the article, what is the finger of a dead scientist worth? This question has been stirring all Florence, the thumb and index finger, the right hand of Galileo, having recently been offered for sale in that city by an old woman named Laura Joni. So it kind of went on a little bit about this particular sale and talked about the government had caught wind of this the sale happening and tried to investigate it, and they did prove that the fingers were in fact genuine, so they were authenticated as Galileo's fingers. Now, there was no actual follow-up in terms of how much they were sold for, but apparently they were sold. So let's back up a second, because you might be wondering, why were Galileo's fingers for sale?
Yes, that's the first question on my mind.
It's a good question. So Galileo, most people are probably aware, he ran into some trouble in the mid-1600s. The Catholic Church put him under house arrest in 1633 because he was supporting the Copernican model of the universe, the idea that the planets travel around the sun, and as opposed to everything traveling around the Earth. So we were not the center of the universe, and the Church didn't like that idea. So Galileo eventually dies in 1642, and he was denied a burial at the Church of Santa Croce in Florence. And that's where Santa Croce is where lots of other, amazing, great minds from history are entombed. Michelangelo is there. Dante is there. I mean, there's some really, heavyweights of history in Santa Croce. But they wouldn't allow Galileo because of the whole house arrest thing and I guess the heresy. So they wouldn't allow that. The Pope thought that would be just a dreadful insult to have him in there. But he did let Galileo get buried in just some small little unmarked corner in the basement. So Galileo gets buried in the basement. And then almost 100 years later, in 1737, attitudes shifted a little bit by that time, and some money was collected, and it was allowed to have a proper mausoleum be built for Galileo within Santa Croce, so they could finally give him the respect that he was due. And while they were moving the body, a few excited admirers, eager, decided that they had the opportunity to grab a souvenir. So 3 fingers and a tooth were taken. And this apparently was kind of a common practice that was done with saints. Catholic followers thought like these were sort of sacred relics that might hold some powers. And maybe just it was kind of cool to have too. Maybe there was a little bit of that involved. Who knows? So 2 of the fingers, the index finger and the thumb of his right hand, and a tooth were kept by one particular person, the Marquis Capone. And he put them in a nice little glass container. They were in a little wooden box. Galileo's had a little carving of his head on top. Nice little piece. Probably showed it to friends and that kind of thing. And it was passed down through a few generations. I'm sure that was exciting to come over to that family's house and see some Galileo fingers, that kind of thing.
Okay.
For the dinner party and so forth. So then eventually comes up for sale, 1906, as we said. And then they kind of disappear again. Just kind of go away for another century. And they pop up at an auction in 2009. So don't know what the history was for that century, but they pop up again for auction. And eventually the buyer contacted officials in Florence, and the fingers were returned to Florence, where the rest of Galileo was entombed by then, but not with the body, but close to the body. They were placed in, and they're currently now on display at the Museo Galileo, along with another finger that was taken. I mentioned there were 3, and that's the middle finger, and that's in a separate glass display next to the other 2 fingers at the Museo Galileo, yeah. So They're there now. And then by 1992, which is obviously backing up a little bit, but in 1992, Pope John Paul II acknowledged formally that the Church did mishandle things with Galileo. So admitted that maybe they made a mistake back then. It wasn't such a big deal that he was promoting science and the truth. So they did issue a declaration. The Pope issued a declaration admitting their erroneous views about his scientific observations and beliefs, which of course we know are correct.
So to be clear, because I remember, of course, Pope John Paul II and a lot of the things that he said, but I don't necessarily remember this particular incident, nor do I remember any kind of follow-up where he actually did say that the Earth travels around the sun and not the other way around.
Oh, did the Pope say? Well, it probably was something he wasn't shouting about,
Okay. Okay.
Admitting mistakes is probably not like your big press release, but it was, like I said, it was a formal acknowledgement, which was maybe paperwork somewhere. Not entirely sure, but that's probably why.
Gotcha. Now, you said earlier that having the fingers would be something at that time that would be really, really cool, which leads me to believe, what exactly is in your crawl space?
I have a cabinet of curiosities and some fun oddities for sure. A lot of, you know me, a lot of sideshow related oddities. I have a nice preserved two-headed turtle. Whatever I can get that I can, it's within my budget. I like to have. I would love to have Galileo's fingers, but that's not going to happen.
Now, and
I was glad to see them.
Yes, and we'll get to that in a moment. But do you have anything that would get you depicted on an episode of CSI?
No.
Okay, just want to make sure.
I don't think so.
Just want to make sure. So, when you sent me this particular story as a possibility of what we were talking about this month, you sent along some pictures. And I noticed, and they again come from weirdhistorian.com, and there is the credit for the pictures of Galileo's fingers, and your name is the credit, which means you've seen them.
Yes, and Florence is one of my favorite cities. If anyone who's been there, it's a gorgeous city. I love it. So much amazing artwork there at the museums. David, the statue of David is there. I mean, it's extraordinary. And for me, one of the highlights, which is probably not the highlight for most people, but for me, and I dragged my family, was to go to the Museo Galileo and see those fingers. I just kind of wanted to make a beeline to the fingers. I knew they were there. There was lots of other amazing displays, of course, but I was like, where are the fingers? I just want to see this is coming from the guy who wrote The Embalmed Head of Oliver Cromwell, a memoir.
Of course.
So this is kind of my thing. But yeah, I mean, it's a really, like you said, you can see it on weirdhistorian.com. It's a beautiful display with the fingers. It's really well done, and I kind of like that middle finger is just pointed straight up to the sky. It just kind of feels like a nice, lasting gesture for all that happened to Galileo at the end of his life. But it's extraordinary to see it. Like, there it is. That those fingers are some of science's most incredible. Come from one of science's greatest minds and most important figures in our history. So it's a pretty cool thing to see. So if you go to Florence, anyone goes to Florence, it's worth seeing. It's worth the trip to the Museo Galileo.
Well, now I have to unpack some stuff from your personal history that needs to be discussed at this moment, and that is, you mentioned that you dragged your family to see Galileo's fingers, and of course you wrote the book on Oliver Cromwell's head. At what point in your courting with your now wife did any of this come up? And was she okay with it?
We met talking about the four-legged woman, whose name is Myrtle Corbin, who was a sideshow performer in the late 19th century. Oh. So she knew what she was getting into from the get-go.
Gotcha. Well, this is another fascinating story. How many pictures do you have of Galileo's fingers, by the way?
Oh, I probably took a bunch, but there's, I chose what I thought was the best one, which is on the website, and I also have a photo of the mausoleum at Santa Croce, which is gorgeous. It's really beautiful. So you can see that on weirdhistorian.com as well.
Well, another fascinating story, and each one gets more weird than the previous. So I'm curious to find out what you might come up with for next month. In the meantime,
I'll find something good.
I'm sure you will. In the meantime, thank you very much, Mark, for being on the program with us once again.
Thanks for having me.
Marc Hartzman, the curator of weirdhistorian.com. He's the author of several books, his most recent one being We Are Not Alone, The Extraordinary History of UFOs and Aliens Invading Our Hopes, Fears, and Fantasies. You can go to my website at thestufffile.com, check out the show number for this program, which is show number 0764, and you'll find the link to Mark's site, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order his book directly. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder. And it's that moment you've all been waiting for, boys and girls. It's time now for the Idiot of the Day.
And now it's time for the strange things adults do. The Stuff File presents the Idiot of the Day.
Yet another blacked-out, will-run performance car driver has been busted and is facing serious consequences. Police have tracked down 21-year-old Carlos Clark in the Charlotte, North Carolina area after an investigation uncovered that he was behind the infamous C7 Corvette Z06, which allegedly fled law enforcement numerous times. Just like in so many of these cases, the thirst for social media fame was this guy's downfall. His Instagram account has over 300,000 followers, and one video which showed him running from police went viral. Well, the cops have now seized his car because they found him through social media, of course. That's right, running from cops repeatedly, going well over the speed limit, blowing through red lights, and in general, treating public roads like your private raceway, then posting all of that evidence online comes with consequences. Who would have thought that? Oh, but there's more. When they caught up with Carlos at his house, they not only found the Corvette, they also seized 4 firearms, 113.4 pounds of THC vials, 10 pounds of THC edibles, 3.6 pounds of Belgian chocolate bars, which apparently is a type of mushroom, 18.8 pounds of marijuana blunts, all pre-rolled, 4 pounds of marijuana resin, 3.6 pounds of mushrooms, and almost $2,000 in cash. The guy is now facing a pretty long list of charges, including felony fleeing. So, why? Oh, why? If you're taunting the cops by eluding them in high-speed chases, and you also have a house full of drugs, would you then continue said taunting by posting video of your chases on your own Instagram account, which has over 300,000 subscribers? One reason, and one reason only: you're an idiot!
Gee, I'm only a kid, but even I know you're an idiot.
And that's it for this edition of the Stuff File program, number 0764. Hope you enjoyed it. The website is thestufffile.com, and once again, Stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H, where you'll find information and links in all of our guests by going to the weekly Stuff File page. Just look for the corresponding program number, and once again, that's 0764. Email me at peter@thestufffile.com. You can also find me on Facebook, Spoutable, Post, Mastodon, and Blue Sky as PA Holder. Check us out on patreon.com, where you can become a patron of the program. Hope to see you back here for our next show on the air, online, or as a download. We're coming to you from everywhere, including KDXRadio.com, TrueTalkRadio.com, over the air on World FM in New Zealand, WLSLLP-FM in Dade City, Florida, KZZHLP-FM in Eureka, California, CKUW-FM in Winnipeg, CFMU in Hamilton, CKLU in Sudbury, Local 107.3 FM in St. John, CHSR in Fredericton, and also streaming on just about any streaming service your little heart desires. That's it. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder, a presentation of Flying Fish Communications. We leave you with this scientific quandary. If, as Einstein said, space and time are the same, then can you be 5 miles late?